Okay, good morning, everyone. Hopefully now the voice is okay. Let me welcome you all. Thank you for joining it. This session is on behalf of IIT Kanpur Alumni Association Outer Delhi chapter, and let me welcome our moderator, Sri Saurabh Chandra sir. He's an IIT Kanpur alumni, and he's an IAS of 1978 batch. He has worked in many departments, and right now he's working as an independent director in MCX. Saurabh sir, over to you. Please take it forward. So you can unmute, please. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Damnesh. Thank you, Sudhirji. Hope everybody can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
Okay. Now, I'm honored to introduce Mr. Rajesh Srivastav, the doyen of the food processing industry, to this August gathering. He is a go-to authority on food and agribusiness. Currently, he is the executive chairman of Rabo Equity Advisors. His company identifies potential investment opportunities, gathers and provides economic and market intelligence, and renders advisory services in the sector of food and agribusiness. He has international experience, having served as the regional head of food and agribusiness Asia in Singapore for 5 years. He's been a venture capitalist. He's worked for Lazard India and joined Rabo India in 1998. He's been advising the government of India. He was a part of the Vision 2015 document prepared by the Ministry of Food Processing in the year 2005. He's also advised Markfed, NDDB, and various state governments. He was instrumental in bringing together a number of investors to create a fund of about $270 million, through which they made 16 investments across the sector, and most of them have been very profitable. Mr. Srivastav is very optimistic about this sector and believes that the government should do a lot more to boost the sector in these difficult times. Ladies and gentlemen, we are passing through a difficult economic period. Some incomes would shrink. As incomes shrink, the allocative priorities would change. However, what would remain constant are wage goods. Food and food processing is one of the wage goods, and the percentage allocation to that particular basket would increase. I would now request Mr. Rajesh Srivastav to take over. He has a slide presentation. There'll be a lot of questions. Questions can be asked at the end of the session. Meanwhile, you can send your questions in writing so that Damnesh can coordinate and put it up to our guest speaker. Thank you. Over to Rajesh ji.
Thank you, Saurabh ji, and good morning to all of you. I don't know how to express myself. I think it's really a proud privilege to be talking to all of you today. I guess, first of all, I come from UP. So Kanpur is as much close, to my heart as Lucknow is. This is where I found my birthplace. And I've actually worked in Kanpur as well. So I'm pretty familiar. But to be talking to all the IIT alumni today and from Kanpur, I think it's really a matter of honor. So I'm very thankful to you, Saurabh and also to Damnish and everybody else in your association who invited me. And thank you again, Saurabh for all this exhaustive, undeserved appreciation of my attributes. But it's always your grace. I think he's very graceful and he's very gracious to me. I'm really honored. I think what I did was that having spoken to him and to Damnish and Mr. Mittal yesterday, and just to gather that what are the present occupations of all of you. Obviously, you are technically very superior, so I'm just a little bit of humble myself before all of you. I will try to say whatever I know about both agriculture and food processing. If you look at the first cover page which I have put up before you, and I say this with some kind of conviction that agribusiness, as I would like to call it, and that covers agriculture, food processing, all of that, and that has a little bit of connotation. I'll come to it in a minute. I say that destined to grow, and this is a very catchphrase because this is a sector which cannot fail. I mean, within that, obviously, some parts can do better than others, but as a sector, it cannot fail. So this is a McKinsey's term actually used some other context, destined to grow. They used it for India, and I'm saying it for these sectors. So let's maintain this at the back of our minds while I go through the presentation. The reason for assembling some slides was that I guess I can manage to get your attention a bit more to the subject matter. Sometimes, while you're speaking, you kind of lose the thread. So let's carry on. I'll try to wrap it up in the next half an hour or so, and then we can happily take your questions. So moving forward, I must take you through this list. Now, very often people do not imagine that what an expanse this food and agribusiness sectors can be, or this canvas can be. When I was raising my first fund, everybody used to ask that there's a concentration risk. You're talking about one sector fund. Sectoral funds haven't succeeded anywhere. But I managed to prove that, look, we are talking about 42 subsectors in agriculture and food processing. So what I did was I bucketed them in 4 buckets here, which is input farm services, infrastructure, primary processing, and secondary processing, or value-added processing. And if you really look at this, I think it would probably cover all what you can imagine connected to agriculture and food processing. Now, you see these red dotted lines here. So on the right side of these lines are actually all the food processing sectors, which are 26 in number. And if I've forgotten something, please do tell me. But I think over the years, 22 years of my life in Rabobank, I think this is something which I should not have. But all the same, I think wine, beer, beverages, whatever you can think of is all here as food and agribusiness. And so if you look at these 42 subsectors and look at the left ones and the right ones, I mean, obviously there is some connectivity because we're talking about the same kind of universe. At the same time, in terms of purely triggers, dynamics, key success factors, all the moving parts, they could be very different from each other. So if you look at wine and beer, then wine and beer, what has it got to do with farm machinery? Or maybe it has, like it takes something else, maybe weather forecasting stations. It doesn't. So I think the point I'm making simply is that in terms of concentration risk really for investors and for lenders, there isn't too much, right? So we are talking in terms of as diverse, and expanse as anything else. And that is what succeeded. And here is what I've done all these last 12 years investing in these sectors. Going beyond, interestingly, and I must also, those of you who are not exposed to agriculture and agribusiness, probably will find it a little bit, what should I say, confusing at times. But honestly speaking, it's a complex universe in agribusiness. At the same time, it holds huge potential. So let me imagine that all of you are well placed and you are investors in your own rights. You can put up factories, you can put up businesses, and you can also make some investments. So take it as one of those discussions today where you can find some targets where to put your money in. Look at India. So I think one of the most well endowed naturally, India, I mean, I'm sure you know that, no rocket science here. But importantly, from my standpoint today, that if you look at the overall resources which we have, I think problem is that we support 17% of world's human population, 15% of livestock, the second largest arable land, about 180 million hectares we have here. Out of that, food grain, of course, is the dominant part. 65% is cropped area in agriculture. We're the second largest in fruits and vegetables, the largest in milk, uh, second largest in wheat, rice. So it on and on. Now go back to 60s and where we faced food scarcity, food shortage. There was famines, there were hunger, and then we imported a lot of food stuff. And that's where we had the Green Revolution. And the Green Revolution proved to be very good. Obviously, in many ways, now in hindsight, certain things have not proven to be good enough, but at least we had full food, security. So in terms of grains, especially. So if you look at the Green Revolution, wonderful. But if you look at the soil condition, it proved to be a pretty bad one because we use urea extensively. We never considered that in 30 years, the soil will erode, productivity will dip. And that's what has happened in the country. But at that point in time, there were different drivers. So more importantly, I think you have all the climates here. It's such a vast country that if it rains in one place, it's famine or drought in another place. And it kind of goes on. And not many countries in the world can claim to be as diverse or endowed as India is, which is great for agriculture, actually. There are a number of issues which we have in Indian agriculture, a number of them. So if you look at the left side, I think the most important was the scale. I think we are talking in terms of something like 85% of our farmland being with marginal farmers, small farmers who have 1 hectare, 2 hectares of land holding. And that's a major mess, many ways, because so many farmers produce. Where is the quality? Where is the consistency? How do you aggregate? How do you get the market access? How do you ensure that each one of them gets the right kind of inputs for the farm? And they have different drivers. It's a complete mess in that sense. And we're talking about some 135 or 140 million, literally people who are engaged in this hardcore agriculture, farm-based activities, maybe more actually speaking. The second thing is because the farmlands are so small that you have technology deficiency. Those farmers of 2 hectares, 3 hectares can't buy a tractor, leave alone laser levelers and all of these modern machinery. And that is again a mess because how do they maintain productivity? And then they have other problems, of course. So technology for being transmitted to these small farmers is something where we should all be focused on, and I'll come to it. What's been happening over the last a few years at least. In terms of policy reforms, extremely important. The problem is that, as I said, small farmers, land aggregation is out of question. Because all these political and quasi-political issues. So you can't keep on buying, or farmers can't keep on consolidating. That's not possible. In fact, on the other hand, as the generations go down, the farmlands also get more divided. So that's again a mess. Leasing, aggregation, contract farming, very recent ordinance, and I'll mention about it later on. All of them have been lacking. So the land reforms have not happened over many decades for a variety of reasons. But that is also what has that caused is that while on one hand we have self-sufficiency in food grains, we do not have in many other food items. One, and secondly, more important, the farmers also, their incomes have been dipping. The only way they are surviving, and because they are growing grains, and there's a procurement of Food Corporation of India, so you get the minimum support price, and they keep on growing it. But that doesn't mean that, really speaking, India is getting what it wants on the food palette. So pulses, edible oils, we import something like 10, 12 million metric tons of edible oil still, largely palm oil, but also soya and also sunflower that comes into country every year. So as I say, there is a double whammy of oil and oil. You import the petroleum, the other oil, and you also import edible oils. And that's terrible for the country, but that's where we are. And likewise, other things as well. Um, I'll come to the last one on the left side later on because that's close to my heart being a banker. On the right side, if you look at micro irrigation, once again, irrigation has been a problem. Of course, a lot has been done by the state. The problem is in the last mile. And again, the problem is in, when you talk of last mile, the issue is on the farmer's affordability. How does he get the costly micro irrigation onto his farm of 2 hectares, 3 hectares, 5 hectares? That's becoming largely. So how does it happen? It survives on subsidies. It survives on grants. And not necessarily they're the best things to happen to any. So if you look at agriculture, I always say that agriculture has to ultimately transition to agribusiness. Each farmer's land holding and agriculture should be a business. He should know that what is his return on the capital or the investment, and that's where he should move on to. Look at productivity. The problem is that we still grow one of the lowest yields, across the, not just the world, global averages, but also in fact, in many ways within Asia as well. 2/3, as you see here. Supply chains, we have an issue of wastage. As we all know, I'm sure you are exposed to the fact that 30 to 40% of perishables or horticultural produce is wasted actually in terms of value in the country. I would add on to it the dry waste which you have in terms of food grains. So while Food Corporation of India stocks some 65 million tons of grains all over the place, largely under the tarpaulin, we don't have warehouses enough. That's again a shortfall. But then so much of wastage, and Saurabhji will bear me out having been in the government, and excuse me if I digress from the government's figures, but I think there's a wastage of something like $20 billion in horticultural produce and $20 billion at least in dry, which is the food grains. $40 billion every year being wasted in value, I think is a huge amount. Look at what could have happened onto our GDP and likewise in terms of fiscal deficit and all, if this wastage could have been arrested. But equally, this is also an opportunity for something to be done in terms of arresting perishability, improving cold chain, improving wastage, arresting wastage, warehousing. All of that is the opportunity here. Mechanization, I mentioned to you, one reason why, because of the farmland size, and you can't introduce mechanization too much. But obviously in the last few years, when there have been migration from, and even on this COVID-19 stuff where people have gone back to villages, but go before that, there were migration happening from rural to urban areas, obviously in search of better opportunities. And with the result, when there was shortage of labor, per force, there was mechanization in the farms. And how did it happen? Very innovative, very creative. People went into a leasing model or timeshare model for the farm equipment to be given to farmers on an hourly basis. 1 day, half day, that kind of things have happened, and they're gaining ground. So large companies, Mahindra's for instance, they're all into farm mechanization and these services. It's wonderful. Last but not the least, access to finance. I think just as farmers need a lot of inputs, a lot of farm practices, advice, similarly, if they did not have money and access to finance, obviously it can't succeed. Now, what happens? If the banks can't reach them, they have to go to intermediaries. Now, the middlemen, as we all know, they charge some usurious kind of interest rates, 25, 30, 36%. I've heard about 40, 48% as well. So a farmer who gives his land as security never gets it back, actually, if it is borrowed from an intermediary. And that's the worst you can do to a farmer. But how do you really make your bankers or the lending agencies reach such a huge number of farmers all across India? That is the big challenge. Now, public sector banks having some 50,000 branches, for instance, they also haven't been able to reach all the farmers. Non-banking finance companies still small. Microfinance, yes, indeed, little bit, but the enormity of the scale of this farming and the number of farmers is too huge. So agri-finance is something which is a great uh, deficiency and equally a major opportunity to have. So, and just as a figure, you have 13% of bank credit to 60% of those employed. And I think you can look at and if you look at food processing, there's a slide here that's even much smaller credit flow to the food processing sector. Moving beyond, so this is the conundrum which the Indian agriculture has faced, which you saw there. But how do you arrest it? What do you do with it? And if you look at the pie on the right side below, and that will show you that the total breakdown of the farm income is not just cultivation. That's of course important, but it's not just cultivation. There's a non-farm business, there's a salary, wages, livestock. Now, if you have to do something holistically to a farmer, merely improving something for the cultivation will not probably improve him. So you have to have, for instance, to have a secondary source of income to every farmer. I mentioned irrigation. Now we have a target of doubling the farmer's income by 2022. Make it 23. Let's say 1 year is gone because of this pandemic here. Make it 23. How do you go there? Because you need some 23% annual growth from 19 to 23 to be able to reach the doubling this size. From 8,000 rupees to 16,000 rupees income is not going to be easy. No, the problem is on sites, inputs, agrochemicals, fertilizers, seeds, retail, market access. How does it go downstream, distribution? What do you need to do? Regulatory reforms, I talked about it. You need financial inclusion, I spoke about it. You need agtech innovation. This is where all the engineers who are today on this call should think about. I think like technology has to be the biggest disruptor in everything around us in the country. And agriculture and food processing cannot be an exception. Without technology, we will not be able to sustain our production or productivity. And as I said, soil erosion. So this 180 million hectares, which I mentioned to you about the farmland, that's actually depleting. Now the arable land has come to 140, and every year it is depleting from 140 to 135, God knows where. How do you maintain that kind of production? That you have 200 or 250 million metric tons of grains, then you have equally this amount of vegetables or horticulture produced. When the land soil is going down in terms of productivity, you need to have technology. And also don't forget, today the farmer is in a great space, people who are producing grains, because of the procurement and MSP. Is it sustainable? Is it the right thing? Are we on the market economy side? We are not. We are on the protected economy side. Ultimately, that's got to be let go of. Moment you withdraw MSP, the farmers will move away from grains. That we have to be very cognizant of. So infrastructure, now warehousing, we mentioned cold chains, all that has to come alive. So, it got to be a multi-pronged strategy to be able to really help the farming, improve the yields. Look at where we want to go. If you look at the average farm yield from 2.5 million tons per hectare in 2016, it has got to go up to 4.5. Now, that's not going to be easy in case of where soils are depleting. So that's where agriculture is today. So I mentioned about this. I think we need to have a quantum increase. And what do you need between 19 and 24 or 23? Year by year, you need to do a lot of things. So, the steps part, so planning part is one part, productivity gap, best practices, inputs, nutrition, just not fertilizers or seeds, but also nutrients. Supply chain linkage is extremely important. And then finally, the value chain, how do you scale it up? That's important. Technology, the market symmetry, the exports, and more importantly, the disintermediation is extremely important, because if you do not remove because today what happens, farmer gets, poor fellows, 15 to 20, 25% of the ultimate selling price. Why? Because the balance goes either into wastage or it goes to intermediaries. If you really have to make, so there is a very nice report which we wrote some time ago was that the success will lie in supply chain efficiency. It will not lie alone in processing or production. It will be on supply chain efficiency ultimately. So that's the overall, I would say, a roadmap. If you were to say that we want to double the farmer's income in 3 years or 4 years time, this is what needs to happen. And how and if it will happen, I don't know. I have no answer to it. But collectively, the government and the private sector has to see and charter this roadmap. Uh, I mentioned about AgTech, and this is something which I guess should interest most of you, that what is been happening around the world, what all has to be brought to Indian agriculture. And in spite of the small size of the farms, in spite of the income level, in spite of the infrastructural bottlenecks, this has to happen. Now, this pandemic today, actually, I mean, obviously, it's too bad for all of us, for the world at large. But, you know, if calamities come, I think people also start having paradigm shifts in their outlooks. And we are being forced to live life differently. Agriculture and food processing also will be different after this pandemic, because people have what you and I would have probably done in 5 years' time has to happen in 1 year, because there's no other way to go. And I'll tell you why. And I'll take a minute on that. Global food production is going down. It will go down further. That said, India has to be self-sufficient. So Atmanirbhar Bharat is just not a blank call which has been given by the Honorable Prime Minister. There's a lot of thought behind it. So you have got to, and that's happening around the world. Most countries will start becoming inward looking. My prediction is WTO will go for a toss. I don't know whether Saurabh will agree with that or no, but I think we are now back to the era of free trade or agreements across regions and small zones, rather than talking in terms of a free trade around the world. You know what is happening in China. Everybody is banning China. Likewise, you'll have some other countries being banned. And there is in fact, US is getting into FTAs now. So I think things are changing. But coming back to this AgTech part, I think this is fantastic. I mean, things happening. Yesterday, I was mentioning, I chaired a session in a different conference, and which was basically FinTech and AgTech. Even better. So you need financial engineering into the agri-technology. But I can tell you there's so much happening on AgTech. There is, as I said, laser levelers, of course, are old stories now, but you have field sensors. I heard somebody from Microsoft speaking that, and likewise Google, and they are getting everything transmitted to the smartphones. On a smartphone, you can detect the soil conditions, what does this farm need, how much nutrients, how much fertilizers. Things are changing. Remote sensing, satellite imagery, all of that is happening. The more important thing which is happening, apart from the machinery, of course, so you have fantastic machines which are being used around the world. We still can't, because they're too expensive, I guess, so we're not being able to get them. But ultimately, you've got to get them. There's no other way. Data analytics is something which, again, is extremely important, because the more data you collect from the farms and the farmers, like your advice and your application of the inputs will be much better. So that's going to happen. And of course, connecting that through the data to the consumers, that's also going to be an extremely important part. The other part, which is going to be order of the day, where again technology will come in, is sustainability. So we are no longer talking about pure agriculture. We have to talk about sustainable agriculture. And the moment you talk about sustainability, obviously you need the power solutions, the irrigation solutions, the soil maintenance, all of that changes. And that's a lot of role which technology can play. So now let me take you a little bit to the consumption side and moving on to food processing. What happens typically is, I mean, if you look at the overall, and this is a very general kind of slide just to give you a good sense of the consumer side and the production side and the gap in between. If you look at the consumption side, is a rising consumerism. I don't need to tell you that income's rising, younger population, the literacy, women working, all of that is the consumerism, and that's not going to change. It's a one-way street. Things which are demographics, which we have, is not going to change. And that by the way, is most definitely a big advantage. At the same time, what we should also realize, it has its own challenges as well. Younger the population, wonderful. You have stronger arms, you have more productive people, fantastic. But let's not forget that younger population is also impulsive. They are very indulgent, they are very impatient. And these three eyes of younger population, they better be properly attended to. If you don't attend to, and we means private, government, whoever. So what they want should be delivered. If you don't, there's definitely frustration. And frustration leads to unrest. So younger populations, so as I say, energies have to be harnessed. And that's what we need to do. So, but households of this income of 200,000 rupees is going to increase 4-5 times in the next 3-4 years. Urbanization, the fascination about branded foods, packaged foods, on-the-go foods, healthy drinks, all that is going to be order of the day, functional foods. So they are being accentuated, if at all, by COVID-19. So this nutrition food, the healthy food, the functional food, packaged food, I'm sure all of us are going through that, right? So the wet market story of our housewives, getting on to the thelas outside, being very happy that Sabziwala has come, we buy from him, or the milkman has come to the doorstep to deliver milk. I think that's out of the window, because now you realize that how precious your life is and how precarious these things can be for your life. So things are changing. On the supply side, because of the farm fragmentation, low technology, losses, inefficient markets, productivity is going down. So, on an average, the gap is actually increasing. Demand is growing 5%, supply is growing 2.5%. Where would this lead to? You have to step up your productivity. So if I were to say, what is the top most challenge today for the policymakers and for us, is productivity. It's not production, it's productivity. For the same acre of land, you need to definitely produce more. How do you do it? Inputs, farm practices, technology. There's nothing else. That's what got to happen. So going forward, now I'm coming to food processing, and I take you back to these 26 subsectors which I had listed in the first slide. And look at this, a little bit dated chart, but very telling chart. We did this exercise in 2017, and it captured the CAGR of last 5 years. And everything, almost everything, you pick up your choice, you like snacks, you like tea, you like cakes, pastries, whatever, everything was growing in double digits in terms of CAGR. And the prediction is going forward, also because of demographics, this will continue to be the trend. Now, if you have a sector growing at 14-15% CAGR, it has to be a beautiful sector. So you cannot go wrong at any food processing subsector. You can only go wrong in the choice of the entrepreneur and the company specific. Otherwise, you can't go wrong. So it's a beautiful set here. And you look at edible oils going at, despite the fact we use so much, we still use per capita, we use much less. So we're still growing at 25%, 27%. Likewise, all of that. Coming to a bit of comparison, again, a very telling chart. Where are we in terms of the processing as such? If you look at the agri as percentage of GDP and then food processing as percentage of total agri output value, Thailand is 60 to 70%. Vietnam is 20-30%. We are 10 to 15%. And we are only about 2-3% for horticulture, for fruits and vegetables. Exports likewise. FDI as well, as you look at percentage of GDP, we get hardly less than 10% actually speaking, and other countries are getting some 40-60% FDI of total. Likewise, cold chains poor, supply chains poor, USP. Now, what is our USP? The USP is, of course, the MSME and the SME sector. So if you look at food processing, we have over 200,000 firms, I would say enterprises, who are in food processing, but only 38,000 registered. Rest are unregistered. The problem it envisages is that you can't manage them, you can't track them, you don't get data enough, you cannot make predictions properly accurately because your feeding itself is on a small base. So those are the challenges which we have, but equally they are MSME. And just to say that India is a country which will continue to be dominated by MSMEs, which is going to be true for many more years. Food safety, this is an, I would say, a major achievement of the government. The kind of shift, the kind of effort which has been done in food safety through the FSSAI in the last 5 years is incredible. Incredible. That's an authority which has proved itself to be, so if you manage it well, it delivers well. And I think they have not just created standards across the links, all links of the value chain, but they've also grown awareness in the consumers, producers, logistics players, all of them, which is amazing. So this is a bit of a growth perspective of food processing. Once again, we did this exercise in 2017. Shift 22 to 23 because I think this pandemic will make almost 1 year as a blank year. To be honest, all targets will shift by 1 year. A $320 billion sector in 17 is bound to more than double in these years to 680. We're talking about some big numbers. 5 years growth at that time was 8.4%. Prediction is 12 to 15% in food processing. Value add should become more than 20% for just about 10 to 15. Export should increase. It's also one of the largest employers in the country. So food processing is expected to employ something like 9 million person days by 2024. And that's a huge sector to be in. So I guess we stay focused on food processing for a while before we come back to overall agriculture. Now, I must mention a bit about the stimulus packages announced recently by the government. I'm sure you've been reading through some big headlines. To be honest, the finance minister on 5 days, she mentioned 1 day, I think, devoted to almost to agriculture and food processing. An agri-infra fund of 1 lakh crores, animal husbandry fund of 50,000 crores, food processing microcredit fund of 10,000 crores, and MSME department, the ministry is being, I guess, extensively overloaded with funds. They've got some huge allocations. The latest is a 50,000 crore fund and a 10,000 crore fund, which I think got last week or something like that. And plus. I don't have the count, but I'm sure many more funds would be here and there in different pockets. Where's the problem? And I'm telling you because I kind of work a little bit closely with through the CII platform and also otherwise. I think the problem is on the clarity on implementation. It's good to allocate money, but how do you really speaking distribute and make it reach the beneficiaries? And that is not yet clear. So, and besides, all this money which you see up is not going to be available in 1 year. It's for 5 years. So you get some part of it in 1 year. But still, if you give it, the other issue is that most of it is designed as subvention. Subvention means the bankers finance and the interest is subvented by this money. But for that to happen, A, the project has to come by, of course. The second, bankers have to be ready to finance it. Then you do a back-ended subvention. Is that and bankers have their own challenges today. They have big mess. They're in a big mess, most of them today. How do you get them to finance activities before interest subvention can reach the beneficiaries? So my sense was the stimulus had to be more of a combination of subsidies and subventions than being purely subvention. 3 major reforms which have happened in the just about last week, ordinances were passed by the Honorable President, and obviously Parliament will vet them in the due time. Long overdue reforms, but it had to be this pandemic, I guess, to force everyone to carry them out. One is the amendment of the Essential Commodities Act. So they've removed cereals, pulses, oil, seeds, edible oils, onions, and all from the list of essential commodities. So that way the movement is free, the storage is free, and people can get them traded. Otherwise, there were major restrictions earlier on. Everybody had to have a separate license, permission, approval. If you stored something like this, you still need permission. All that is free. So the second thing which is important is they've given the liberty to farmers to actually sell their produce anywhere in the country without the intervention of what they call as the APMCs, and without having to pay money to APMCs. And APMC must be regretting or ruining the day this was announced, because their activities go down. But then I think they've axed their own feet, because they haven't been able to keep the mandis and all properly up to speed and safe. So this is the second one. And the third one, which is important, is contract farming. And this again has been now come through, passed by ordinance. In some pockets, some states was being practiced earlier. The problem has been in enforcement of contracts. There's a very good section in this ordinance, which is on dispute resolution, where they have given the authority to the sub-divisional magistrate to adjudicate if there was a dispute between the off-taker and the farmer. And I think, again, the devil is in detail and implementations. One will have to wait and watch how does it get through and gets translated. So how, and I must do some simple predictions for all of you, that what would happen post-pandemic, according to me, in these sectors. I think, as I said, agriculture and food processing will lead the rebooting of economy, along with, of course, healthcare and IT. Agtech, fintech will prosper. Consumers, you and I, will conserve cash and will prefer mid-priced products, will not get into fancy buying. So I think all these imported fragrances and imported cheeses and juices probably are out, for at least for the next 1 or 2 years. Packaged and processed food will thrive. So obviously you see a lot more happening properly, systematically, rather than the roadside. Health, food safety, traceability will be the new normals, which all consumers will now understand and look through. Nutritional security will replace food security. I think that had to happen once again, long overdue. Again, by force, we are all focused on nutrition now. Functional foods and nutraceuticals will grow, because you will have a lot more food items which will attack individual problems of the body. Sit-down restaurants, fine dining, all these formats will give way to takeaways and home deliveries. I don't think you and I will venture out to a restaurant too often, maybe once a month or something like that, but not every day because of these safety considerations. Frozen and chilled foods sectors will boom. So I'm also making some advice to all of you in case you're investors. These are the sectors to consider. Chilled foods, frozen foods are the sectors of choice going to be. Infrastructure sectors, micro irrigation, warehousing, cold chains, packaging, they will be very, very attractive from investment point of view. Let me close here and take on a few questions, and thank you for being very patient.
Thank you, Rajesh sir. I think Saurabh sir is back.
I'm sorry, there are too many electricity disruptions there.
Yeah. So I'm ready for any questions. I think I've done with my presentation. Anything which I need to say more, please feel free.
Damnesh, you must have received some questions in writing. I see 11 questions in writing. And
yes,
anybody else who wants to ask a question can raise his hand and ask directly, if that's okay.
Yeah, if anyone has questions, there are questions which has been mentioned. We'll take them, as well as you can raise hand, and we would will allow you to ask questions. So I see first question, Anand Gupta has raised hand. I'm allowing him to ask question. Anand, you can ask question.
Thank you, Rajesh ji. It was really good. It gives us a kind of wider perspective about agribusiness. I would like to understand what is your outlook towards this organic farming and the demand, and then related supply chain. So if you could give us some insight into this part of business.
All right, very good question. I'm sorry I did not mention organic. I should have mentioned organic as being one of the favored sectors as well.
Yes.
So organic, of course, as we all know, has a huge demand outside in other countries, people who can afford Europe, Japan, US. So it's been growing largely on the back of exports, as you know. Domestically, organic has not still gained ground, but I must say that as we get into higher per capita incomes here and the overall, consumers become also a little bit more choosy. My own prediction is that organic in India also will grow pretty well sizably. So next 5 years, small base at this moment, but it is going to grow. Uh, I think the challenge here is, and you mentioned about it, I think supply chain is the biggest challenge in organic because at the end of the day, what is organic? Organic is all about certification at every stage of the chain, not just in the farms itself, farm of course, but while you handle, while you process, while you pack, while you ship, it all has to be very clean. It's like a corona in organic, since beginning. That's how this sector should be handled. And the reason is simple. The reason is if you claim something to be organic and it's proved to be not organic later on somewhere in the market, there's huge claim. I'm sure you've been reading. In US, it's a standard item. The claims and claims and claims filed for organic certification. The challenge has been in certification in India as well. I think people have not really in the zeal to grow. Very often we all kind of miss out on these things. But I think potential wise, a great sector to be in. Handling wise, the biggest challenge will be in scaling up because you have to deal with farmers who are largely in the remoter part of the country because that's where the most virgin land is actually. So where the best organic produces in Jharkhand and Bihar and Chhattisgarh and all and Northeast. That's where you get the best farmland, which has not been exploited by the fertilizers. So yes, indeed, great sector, good domestic potential as well now going forward. Also because don't forget, organic in India cannot be sold through your traditional trade models, not through the mom and pop stores. Organic will get sold on retail shelves properly, modern retail. Obviously, it's expensive as well, correct? So I think that's
Yes,
where
sir.
we're coming from. I guess if you wanted to invest in organic, I think good one, choose your company well, or if you're going to do it yourself, then most importantly, please hire people who are great, I would say agricultural people who know the supply chains, who can source from farmers and do not compromise on standards.
I think that's one of the challenge in terms of trust to the organic product. There are many companies who sell it, but there is a trust which is yet to be built that the organic products are actually the organic one. I see that's one of the biggest challenge. Sir, one more question is from Rajeshwari that is a bit related to it. It is for medical herbs and plants. Is that an opportunity? Is that a sector which is a focused one under this?
Yes, very much. I think I mentioned, so you medicinal plants, aromatic plants, I think I mentioned nutraceuticals. And nutraceuticals is a term which actually covers all of that. So great
Okay.
opportunity, great opportunity. So
Okay, sir.
what is nutraceutical? Nutraceutical companies basically source herbs and plants and they make extraction out of that. And then they make the ingredients like, for instance, Garcinia, glucosamine. All of these are basically from herbs and plants and they go into glucosamine. I'm sure you all have heard, right? So it's sold by Amway and all at huge prices, and they essentially go and gets into arthritis for arthritis treatment. So
Okay, sir.
great opportunity.
So we're taking the next question is from Meher Viswas. Meher, you can ask your question. You can unmute and ask your question. Meher? Meher, you have raised hand. Do you want to ask question? Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, Meher,
Hello.
we can hear you now.
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, thanks a lot. I mean, it's a wonderful presentation. There are many points to be taken as a takeaway. And now, what is the biggest challenge we are facing? It is basically the funding requirement for the innovative projects, because most of the bankers are educatedly uneducated with respect to agriculture is concerned and the food processing. Because I have contacted few bankers about API and other things, especially the functional food things. So it is very difficult to convince these uneducatedly educated banker people. So is there any, I mean, angel investors or venture capitalists who might be interested to invest in API and in the functional food areas, especially the areas in Northeast, the Bengal and Northeast? There's a huge potential because you need to be in the pharma sectors. If you have to be independent, we have to focus on API. So I just want some things to be thrown from your side.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mr. Biswas, once again, something which has been engaging my attention for the last couple of years, and Saurabh is aware about that. I think especially in food processing, I think the understanding levels of our bankers, unfortunately, is very poor. And then today, if you look at the credit gap itself, it's about 180,000 crore in food processing is the credit gap, because people do not understand, so they don't finance. Or if they finance on some huge interest rates, because food processing is not categorized the same way as agriculture is, even by Reserve Bank of India. So I think that you have a major problem.
They don't understand, but they are educatedly uneducated, I'm telling you.
Perfectly, you're absolutely correct, absolutely. Because in case of agriculture, at least NABARD is there, which is a developmental institution, and they seem to be educating bankers. But in food processing, there is no understanding. Which is why, I mean, within this group, I've been thinking of setting up a specialized, dedicated food processing lending institution. So, which is what we've been working on for a while with the government. Let's hope that it fructifies in sometime soon. But having said this, I think the bankers also need to be mentored and guided, and they need to be brought onto that plate, because not one institution can suffice. There's so much of credit gap in funding food processing. If you are into functional foods, I'm not surprised at all that the bankers don't understand. I'm not surprised at all. So I think you will do much better to actually source a venture capitalist or a private equity player at this stage. Although I must say, the investors are no replacement for bankers, because they should go hand in hand. There's a debt equity match which should happen anyway in every project. But unfortunately, understanding is not there. And NABARD, for sure, it will shake you off, because they will not get into food processing at all. They draw a line very conveniently. So there isn't anybody. In terms of VC players, angel investors, I think there's a lot of understanding still. There are better players. Unfortunately, we are not investing in startups. Otherwise, we definitely should have had the understanding. But I can guide you to other players. If you send me a mail or send Saurabh ji a mail.
I had dropped my email ID. I have dropped my email ID. It will be nice to be in touch with you, because there are certain things is ready from our end, as in with respect to aggregating the lands and other things. The land has been already procured or aggregated. The only thing is, I mean, whenever I have submitted the project report, DPR, in detailed DPR, I mean, as I told them, I found it very difficult. I mean, they understand, basically they are a realistic point of view. I mean, the real estate has so dominated in the banker's mind, they don't understand. I mean, that's
right, Mayor, you can
see, I'm a technologist.
Yeah, Mayor, you can send the email to me. You have my ID, the Manish one, and I can forward it to Rajesh sir, and then you both can connect. Is that okay?
Yeah,
I take the next question.
My email ID in the chat box.
Okay.
I dropped my email ID in the chat box. If you can look into it.
Yeah. Sure. Thank you. I take the next question. That is from Smita Srivastava. Smita, you are allowed to talk. Please unmute and ask your question.
Good afternoon, everybody. Actually, we have ancestral farming lands. Particularly at the moment, we are into advertising, but I want to, get into the agriculture sector. And at this moment, it's something very vague for me. I have been searching on this in several days, but I'm still not able to get from where should I start. Okay, I know most of you are very, experienced over here. So this sounds a very basic question out here, but I still need to know, like, I am much interested in culinary herbs. And are you able to hear me?
I'm able to hear you.
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
In culinary herbs, and accordingly what like my husband and I have planned in mind that maybe once, like, growing oregano and marjoram and thyme and something like this, and maybe further we have plans of utilizing it either in a dried form or something like spreads, dips, and utilizing that over there. So I still need to know and understand from where can I get a basic understanding of what exactly, how to go about it, how to understand more about processing, how to gain more knowledge about latest farming, something like that. So
Can I ask you which part of India is your land situated?
it is near the Lucknow and Hardoi area.
I see. Okay. So I think, well, very difficult question really, because one has to know the land, the kind of capital resources you want to deploy, all of that. But just for gaining basic understanding, I can refer you to a few publications. I guess obviously it's very cold reading at times, but there are some good publications, especially around what you mentioned about the culinary herbs and things like this. I think in the Ministry of Food Processing, we had done in 2017 a nice report on that. Once again, if you drop your email to Damneesh or to me, I will try to send it to you, just for the basic reading. Having said this, that still cannot lead you on to a business per se, right? You need to engage somebody who can advise you, handhold you, and really get you onto it, because there's so much to do. If you want to do some exotic items like what you mentioned, then probably you're looking at some greenhouse cultivation and all. And that's again something which needs to be properly investigated and told. So good that you have an interest. I think you hit the sweet spot as well, but you need to do it carefully, because they're all high value products, and they could be greenhouse is capital intensive, as you know, but it's very interesting also. So please pursue that. That's my advice to you at this moment. And I can refer you a few reports which you can read just to develop your basic understanding.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm dropping my email ID here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Smita. I take the next question. Atul Bhatnagar, please, sir, you can ask your question.
Hi, Rajesh. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
It's nice to connect with you again.
Absolutely. I didn't know that you were IIT Kanpur.
Yeah, very much. That's in fact, we have my friend and I, we are running Sun Moksha, where we are doing smart irrigation, smart nano grids. Now, in smart irrigation, we have a solution by which we can provide the right amount of water at the right time and right location through a shared resource, which is, let's say, a pump, can be a solar pump, can be an electrical pump. And the water is measured as per the soil and the crop condition. So each farmer gets his right amount of water at the right time. So it's not like everything goes on when the electricity is on or when one pump is on. We can schedule. Now, all of this requires IoT and cloud. So all this is in place. It's been proven, shown results, because it leads to water conservation under the earth. It leads to less wastage of water. Now the question is, when we go to the government, first of all, they don't want the farmer to pay for water, yet they want to conserve water. And when you talk of IoT and all, when you talk about the smartness of the irrigation solution, the babus get confused. I mean, they can talk about irrigation, but they can't talk of smart irrigation. So what are the options when it comes to, and you need some patient capital. I mean, you need to kind of show it, and it takes at least a certain amount of time before the results come in. If you go to VCs, the return on capital they want is very high. Government seems to be a good source, but they can't understand it. So what would you suggest can happen in such a situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the government, I do not know, you now have a Ministry of Jal Shakti, right? Which is the new one.
Yeah.
Have you been? Yeah. You've spoken to them?
If you're talking to Panchayati Raj Jal Shakti, yes, we have kind of made something, but they haven't yet gotten. I mean, I've presented Niti Aayog also just to make this, but
Yeah, but
everybody's talking of how much. Because somewhere the policy has to be such that you can look. They are giving solar pumps free now. That is solving maybe the energy problem on the electricity side. But if you give solar pumps free, that means the water will come out anytime when the solar is up, when the sun is up. So you are actually draining water from under the earth, maybe at zero cost, but the fact of the matter is you're draining away the water supply. So you created another problem by solving the previous problem. We need
agreed.
a control mechanism, controlling and monitoring mechanism, and that is what the government is kind of focusing on.
I mean, I don't know what's your requirement exactly. Is the problem that farmers can't pay, or the problem is that the government is not coming on to assist or grant funding, or you need a VC support or something? I don't know what exactly you need. So I think,
On the private side, other than the government, how can you fund such projects?
I mean, it's easy. I think first of all, I mean, getting money from the farmers, I think many states actually allow. I don't know why is it happening here. That's one part. The other part is funding wise. I think I would guide you to NAB Ventures. That's a new VC fund of NABARD, NAB Ventures, and they're doing some good job in this. Try to meet them. If you want, I can introduce you.
Okay, sure. We'll do that. Thanks. Rajesh.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Atul. So now the next question is from Sharad Tripathi. Sharad, you can please ask your question. Sharad,
Can you hear me?
yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, my name is Sharad Tripathi. I came out from 64-69 batch, working in aerospace defense nuclear in Europe, running a firm for last 30 years, and having a bench in Bangalore. After retirement, I had been dreaming of going into agriculture because I come from Auraiya, Bundelkhand belt. Reason is very poor. In my adolescence, I worked in farm. I'm in a very strange situation that I would like some advice from you. From my wife's side, we have about 200 hectares here in France, growing wine, grapes and wine, and suddenly the business has gone down for the last 5 years. We're running at loss significantly, and I'm thinking of converting into pulses and other things. And so how involving farmers around my village into this? Is there any way a cooperative can be formulated and supported by in a business model? It should be survivable beyond me. I'm running into 75, and with Corona and everything around, you never know how long it lasts. So I'm primarily looking for some business model, and I see that there are many people around from around Kanpur, and you know the kind of situation and lives our farmers live there. Is there any way of putting a cooperative supported by business which should be autonomous and carry it on beyond me?
First of all, I wish you a long life. So despite Corona, please don't be pessimistic. At the same time, on your business side, I guess once again, I would encourage you to really get involved or engage somebody who's an agri-business consultant, because otherwise a general advice on this, let's say in this platform, may not really be appropriate. The only thing we can tell you is that obviously there are many activities you can do. How to organize? I think you can create an FPO. That's the latest model, farmer producer organization, and that can be created by both by NABARD, SIDBI, yourself. There are other private sector players as well. And you said you're in Bangalore, right?
No, I'm living in Paris. I have a firm in Bangalore, but I live in Paris. I'm calling you from France.
Right. But your farmland is here, right? Near Bangalore.
No, in France.
Oh, in France.
Yeah.
Oh,
we have about 200 hectares of farmland producing wine and primarily grapes, and we would like to convert that, and that is where I need some kind of cooperative arrangement where my neighbors in Bundelkhand can be bought in here for a short while, and they can benefit of this land and produce something which can be sold here.
That's a different geography. I don't know whether I'm competent to advise you for France, but very broadly speaking, please keep on growing wine, making wine. That's where because
Rajesh, Rajesh, I'll bring you some good wine from your homegrown wine, but my request is on the Indian side, not on French side. I know what we can do here.
yeah, sure.
I've gone into that very extensively. I need to know how to put a cooperative together with the farmers around in my village, and who can come here.
Yeah, so do not attempt a cooperative because that legislation is very restrictive, regressive. I think you should put up FPO, which is a shadow cooperative, a proxy cooperative, farmer producer organization. That's what people are going for. That's equally a bankable entity. You can, how many farmers, I don't know, but even if there are 1,000, 2,000 farmers, doesn't matter, maybe more actually. You can make an FPO. There is an agency of government here called Small Agribusiness Farmers Consortium, SFAC. And that comes handy. SFAC can be very useful. They even grant money for organizing farmers into FPOs. So I can put you in touch if you wish to. You can contact them. They can help you just to organize them.
Definitely, Rajesh. Yeah, I'll be delighted. You know, right now I'm stuck here and I cannot even come to India.
SFAC, right body, SFAC, right to the managing director. She's a very nice lady, and I'm sure she'll be helpful.
What should I do for you? Can you send me the address or something? Or
I can send you the email address. She's Mrs. Neel Kamal Darbari. She's an IS officer of Rajasthan cadre, but very nice, very accommodating lady.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Is there anything coming from UP government by any chance? No, because I'm in Bundelkhand.
I don't know, that we have to look at. I'm thinking every government would do, but in any case, SFAC has grant money. So for organizing farmers, it should not be a problem. The only thing is who manages them. You've got to create a model for management as well in the FPO. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, sir. Thank you. The next next is Sudhanshu Goel. Sudhanshu, you can unmute and ask the question, please.
Right, unmuted. You can hear me?
Yes,
we can hear you.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Some great questions here, Atul and the last gentleman. So, but my overarching question really is: everybody knows this. There are reams and reams of stuff written out there, which talk about how to improve matters. There's money, there's willingness. On the private side for sure. So what is it that what is really required to change this whole and shift this paradigm? Because, Rajesh, you mentioned land reforms, the government has been sitting on these for I don't know how many decades. Is there that willingness to change? Because without that, I don't really see much happening. What do you think?
I mean, I guess if you ask me, really speaking, it's a political will. Because agriculture is most definitely a very sensitive area for politics, as you know. I think one thing which can change it all is political will. I think in the last 3 ordinances, for sure, you've seen that because of a variety of reasons, the government has shown that will and they've carried out the essential commodities, contract farming, direct market access for farmers. All that has happened in one shot. Now there are 2 other things to happen. And I fail to understand why can the cooperatives not be properly organized, legislation changed, restrictions removed like other countries. Let the farmers manage their own cooperatives because FPOs, as I said, is a proxy. That's not happening. One, likewise, in the same area, I mentioned access to finance. The access to finance to farmers cannot be better than through the cooperative banks, state cooperative banks. And most of them are rotten. They are at 20 to 30, 40% NPA levels. They're not working at all. And give money, capitalize them, hole in the pocket, money goes out. And they're again hungry for money. That's what they're doing. But having said this, they have virtually about 450,000 branches, so to say, which is called PACS, Primary Agricultural Cooperative Societies, in almost every village of the country. But they are not working efficiently. Why not? Banks can never be like that. It can never reach that scale in India.
And you can't keep having loan waivers and so that nobody needs to actually return anything. It's just inefficient drain of resources, is it not?
So exactly. So what happens? It all comes to bite how the banks, if the public sector banks are bitten, the government ultimately recapitalizes them again. So it's a round robin, right? It's a vicious circle which is going on.
Taxpayers' money.
Taxpayers' money, and that's got to give way. But unfortunately, you and I don't drive politics. So
No, but that was my question. Do you really see any change at that on these fundamentals? Because without that, and then like Atul also referred to this business of solar pumps, which I've commented on in in certain conferences. It's such a completely upside down idea. I don't know why government comes up with these plans. I mean, you are draining water freely, just no restriction to anybody. Just keep wasting water in a country like ours where we need to really conserve. Anyway, that's enough from my side. Thank you.
no, that is true. But I think this is the other side. But on the positive side, it's not right to say that nothing is happening. I think lots of good things are happening. I think the pace could always be faster. But as I said, you don't need pandemics to force all this. These things can happen in the normal course properly with better coordination. Unfortunately, we do things more by default than by design. It's not a good idea. But
thank you. Thank you, Sudhanshu. Ashok Kamal sir, you can ask the question. Ashok Kamal sir. Okay, it's
can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Rajesh, I would like to ask you a question. In 2003, I decided to enter the milk processing business, and it was a liquid milk processing business. And I entered, and Amul also entered the market in Delhi. And there was a market share war that I got caught between Amul and Mother Dairy. We tried to reinvent our model, all kinds of models. We failed very badly at it. I lost crores of rupees in it, the entire business. Well, this plant was located in Dharuheda in Haryana. And down the line, then they decided to impose, the Haryana government decided to impose a cess on milk collection. And now I'm fighting a battle with the Haryana Dairy Development Board, in which they have levied a demand of 1 crore 8 lakhs of rupees on me. Principal plus interest, came out with a dynamic scheme. Ultimately, I exited that business having lost almost about 15 to 20 crores of rupees in that entire business. So my question to you is, anybody who's entering the milk business, milk processing, because this was milk procurement, processing and marketing per se of liquid milk. But anybody entering this business, I don't want him to burn his fingers with this experience that I've had. So any advice that you would like to give to him? That is what my question is.
But I just going back, and what was the company's name you had?
Sorry?
What was the company's name, your company?
My company's name was Orient Agro Private Limited.
And you were sourcing, you said collecting milk as well. So what
I was
capacity?
collecting mostly in the Alwar district. This plant was located on the border of Haryana and Rajasthan. So the funny part of the business is that neither on the milk procurement price that you have a control, nor on the milk selling price that you have a control. The only intermediate control that you exercise is on the processing part, whatever you can do.
So you
dimensions of the business, you could have gone into a powder, but powder then is a totally different cup of tea. The investments are very much higher. So, but I failed. I totally failed in that business. I admit it.
But you mentioned that you got caught in the fight between Mother Dairy and you mentioned that you were caught in that fight between Mother Dairy.
Yeah, because Amul entered the market, and Amul is such a big player. They have such deep pockets. And even though Mother Dairy has about almost, I think, 250 outlets of their own, and Amul is going through the basically the Kirana shops to market their milk. But they've succeeded. Amul today has a milk processing capacity in this area, that is in the NCR of Delhi, of almost about what, 40 lakh liters of milk that they process every day. This is the Mehsana dairy part of the Amul business.
Yes, indeed.
I'm not
I
talking
think,
about any other of the cooperatives.
look, Mr. Kamal, I think obviously I'm sad that you lost money, and I do not know what capacity was this your plant. But at the same time, dairy, in a way, is definitely difficult because you source money from thousands of farmers. But importantly as well, if you just sell liquid milk, it's a very low margin business. I think if you look at the Amul and all, of course, the huge capacities, Amul, Mother Dairy, and some larger dairy companies. I mean, I guess anything below 500,000 liters a day is non-viable at this moment in general. That's a very generic remark. But overall, I guess if you look at dairy players, Mr. Kamal, recently in the last 5-7 years, there are these few niche players which have come up, which have actually made good money on brands. And they have got some differentiated products like Milk Mantra, for instance. And they're doing decently well. They have a very well recognized brand. They're selling some, of course, good milk, good stuff. But the days of any dairy company surviving purely on dairy milk, liquid milk is just gone. I think you need to move on, make something else, whether it is an SMP and all is just a derivative. I'm not bothered about that. But either you make, I mean, everybody makes butter and ghee, but you move on to curd, you move on to some ethnic sweets, you move on to something else. Purely liquid milk will not sustain you for sure. And you're right, absolutely. The government's making cess, the government creating all this artificial pricing, fixing minimum purchase price. That's a major mess. But I think the days are there. A lot of consolidation happening already, as you know. Large multinationals have entered. Danone is here, Lactalis is here, and I think they are gobbling up lower capacity. So sad that you lost money, but the business of milk per se will not go away because there's so much of milk in the country, and we need to process, and we are also milk drinkers. So that part will continue. But sad that because of the bad policies or some governance issues there, I think you had to lose. But yeah, so I think I can.
Rajesh sir, yeah, thank you, Ashok sir. Rajesh sir, there is a question from Anupam Saranwala. Not many agri-tech startup have been successful yet. Any thoughts? What are the reasons?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, startups always are, as you know, 1 out of 10 or 20 will succeed. That's the usual story. That's a venture capitalist theory as well, right? So everything cannot succeed, A, and B. As I mentioned to you, in India, the biggest challenge is to really distribute your products. If your captive audience is the farmers, you're talking in terms of multitude of farmers. How do you reach out to them is the key story. I think one very good vehicle which has come of age is now the FPOs. I think because they're clusters, they're organizing farmers into one body. You cannot reach thousands, but you can reach few FPOs. I think my only advice would be to all the tech companies, do not attempt to reach individual farmers. You reach through these FPOs and these organized bodies. Otherwise, it will be a big mess because dealing with, like in dairy, Mr. Kamal said, if you deal with some 20,000-30,000 farmers a day, that takes away your breath. So that's the
Yeah.
But it will happen.
Okay. Okay, sir. We have the next question is from Viswajit Sinha. Sir, you can ask your question.
Rajeshji, given your vast experience and how Indian consumer market has developed, and if you look at the COVID effects, what's the single opportunity where you would put your own money as an angel investor? And by that I mean aiming for a full or partial exit in next 3 to 5 years to a VC firm.
So I am a banker. So my heart will go out to first the financing side. I would put my money into fintech, which is going into agtech or agri. And there are a number of companies which are coming up for very innovative financial solutions for agriculture. And they are giving out money for catering to all the links in the agri value chain. And that's where I would put my own personal money, whatever little I have. That will be my take on it. Because honestly speaking, there I can make a difference. I can also give my 2 cents to the promoter. and we can devise products. One thing I didn't mention in my speech was that in agriculture, and somebody asked about the banking, for instance, not just they don't understand the sectors. The problem in agri and food processing is you need structured finance solutions. You don't need vanilla products. You don't need a vanilla ice cream there. You need something else, a tutti frutti types. You need to make these structured solutions, because the whole sector is such complex. Seasonality issues, drought, famine, floods, all of that, trade, non-tariff barriers. You need to structure the solution around the requirements, and that's lacking in us. So I would put my money on fintech, if that answers your question.
Okay. And I have a relevant question.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Let's just go. There are a few other guys, so I'm just putting to the next one. The next is Sadab Ahmed. Can you please raise your question?
Okay. So my question is that as you said that like technology is finding very difficult to penetrate the agriculture, especially in a place like India. So my question is, what is the prospect of drones that you see here, and with a special perspective on how the small farmers are going to use it? As you said, as somebody mentioned, even the farm machinery has been very difficult to afford by these people, so they are using it in a time sliced manner. So what about a thing like drones? What prospect do you see about that, so that it's a win-win situation for both the farmer and the person giving the service?
Yeah, I think as part of the technology, drones will have to come into play. But quite honestly, I see that happening in any kind of a major scale about 2 years ago, 2 to 3 years away, that drones will be deployed properly. Once again, as I said, because farmlands will not be consolidated, the only way to deliver that will be through a utilization or timeshare or a leasing model. I think you need to have the intermediate vehicle setup, which is the FPOs and the self-help groups or cooperatives, who will be the best users of all this to happen. And I think somewhere the government has to recognize that for organizing farmers, you need to create these cluster vehicles, which are cooperatives or FPOs. There is no other panacea. There is no other panacea. That has to happen. So I think you're to tell, not just drones, anything else, sensors, drones, satellite imagery, whatever is expensive. And I told this the other day to the Secretary of Agriculture I was talking to. I said, your money which you have set apart for agri infra and this and that, do not look at all the direct lending subventions and all. You should look at this technology system where you have a viability gap. It should go to where you need it most. So I think that's where you will be. But to answer your question, I think drones definitely will be deployed. I think it's being done in other parts of the world as well. And I think, but in India, of any size and scale, I think it's about 2 years away.
Okay, sir. There is a question. Somebody has not mentioned the name, but I'll just take the question. It says that if somebody has an disposable money of 10 to 15 lakhs, where can he invest in the agri and food processing sector?
Look at a listed company on the stock market and invest there into food processing. Because
right.
Otherwise it's very tough. I think
okay.
You can track that movement. No?
Yeah, or he can be part of some the angel networks and may work through that.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea. Yeah. And I think that gives me an idea. Why don't you, in the alumni here in the IIT, for instance, I'm sure most of you are worthy and have good worth. I think why don't you create an angel network for investing into agri food processing itself? Create a good corpus.
Yeah.
And
that's a good idea, sir.
He can guide you, or I can help you as well. And I think that makes a little bit of a corpus. So you have a kitty of some 30 crores, and then you make a difference wherever you go.
Sure, sir. We'll take it forward with the committee. See, the last question we have is from Sunil Mittal. Sunil, you can ask your question. So this would be the the last question for today.
सर मुझे ये कहना है, मेरी आवाज सुन पा रहे हैं सर आप?
आपको बात
Yes,
बताइए।
आ रही है।
सर मैं ये कहना चाह रहा हूँ कि ये जो हम लोग फूड जो ग्रो करते हैं तो उसमें वी अप्लाई पेस्टिसाइड्स एज वेल एज फर्टिलाइजर्स। हेलो,
हाँ जी बिल्कुल।
Yes, yes.
आप जो ये जो फूड पे ये जो आपका जो फर्टिलाइजर है और जो आपका जो पेस्टिसाइड है वो आपकी जो क्रॉप है, क्रॉप की सरफेस के ऊपर जाके स्टिक कर जाता है एंड देन इन पेनिट्रेट्स इन दी फूड और इन द प्लांट्स। तो मैं जानना चाहता हूँ क्या ये कंसर्न है आप लोगों के लिए या नहीं है?
बहुत बड़ी कंसर्न है, बहुत बड़ी कंसर्न है, और हमारे लिए नहीं है, दुनिया भर में ये कंसर्न है कि ये जो प्रॉब्लम है ओवर यूज ऑफ पेस्टिसाइड्स, फंगिसाइड्स, herbicides, fertilizers, most certainly it harms, and you are, as consumers, we all get affected. So that obviously urea is the worst, so you should discourage use of urea. That's the government also think, but it's the cheapest one as well, so value for money mein chalta hai. Otherwise you should use more of these nutrients and potash and phosphates. Importantly, आप हमारे यहाँ अभी इतना यूज नहीं हो रहा, बट वर्ल्ड वाइड बहुत एम्फेसिस है on these bio fertilizers, bio pesticides. So the biotech products to replace the chemical products is something where the country should be driven to. ये development थोड़ा मुश्किल है, इसको जो आपकी और companies हैं who are into traditional agrochemicals, they resist it actually speaking, but honestly bio fertilizers and biotech companies should most definitely be encouraged. उसमें ये problem नहीं आएगी, उसमें residues नहीं होंगे, उसमें हमारी कोई इस तरह की hazardous चीज नहीं रह जाएगी।
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. Anyone in the attendee, please feel free to write it on the email, and we should take it forward with the Rajesh sir. Saurabh sir, over to you.
I would like to thank Rajesh ji for a very informative presentation. His patience in answering all questions. And I would just like to tell Mr. Atul Bhatnagar that the Bade Babu in Jal Shakti happens to be an IIT Kanpur alumnus, and he may like to contact him. We just awarded him in a function recently. And I'm sure, and he's worked with me, and he is very helpful. And he perhaps understands the business as well as anybody else. Other than that, there are issues of loan waivers, but then although it may be a false equivalence, what they say is that the loan waivers directly and indirectly in the corporate sector are about 10 times as much. The agriculture sector actually needs a lot of help. It is in distress. As a farmer, I have some idea of what the situation in the rural areas is. And especially after the labor have gone back, there are very little jobs there. Manrega alone cannot actually give them the kind of income they were getting in centers like Mumbai and Delhi. A lot of them are therefore planning to go back. But what we have to do is create opportunities for labor in rural areas, in the non-farm sector, or allied agricultural activities. Agriculture alone cannot sustain a population load of about, let's say, 50 to 60 crore people. Technology can help, it can raise incomes, and this is where the strength of our alumni lie. And I would suggest that we start looking at it. The Outer Delhi chapter has been working on a panel of mentors who could perhaps guide them. Mr. Rajesh Srivastava has always been very helpful. I'm sure we can look at him for guidance. In the end, I would once again like to thank him for sparing so much time for us. Thank you so much. Thank you all the people who sat through this discussion. I hope it's been of some use. Thank you.
Thank you from my side, Saurabh. Ramneesh, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rajesh sir. Thank you, Saurabh sir, for introducing Rajesh sir, bringing him to this session. We'll have more sessions from the IIT Kanpur Outer Delhi chapters. Wish you all a good day today. Enjoy your Sunday. Thank you.